Hello, everybody. Today is August 1st, Bitcoin Independence Day 2018, and we're bringing you Block Digest 118 at block height 534,736. So, hooray, it has been a year since one of the most ridiculous conflicts in this entire space. We are watching Bcash flounder more and more and seeing things progress at an unbelievable pace in Bitcoin. So we have a special guest with us, Adam Gibson from Join Market. He's going to be explaining a little concept after we get through the whole UASF memories and memes section. But you want to say hi to everybody, Adam?
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you.
We really appreciate having you. And what's going on with you today, Rick?
Oh man, just celebrating Independence Day. Been thinking about it for the past 24 hours. Really can hardly believe it's been a year since that happened. And yeah, it's really the culmination and like the end of that long debate, right? It's like we're celebrating the year process of like a year from finally ending that debate. So it still continues on, but like you're saying, I think the devil's in the details there as far as who's outpacing who.
And what's going on, Gene?
I really wish we could do a user-activated soft fork on this heat wave we're having.
That's a ski trip.
You need to embrace the good part of summer, Janine. The being able to drink outside, the cool nights. You just be a night owl for the summer.
Yeah, the cool nights are good, minus the drinking, because I don't do that.
Because you're a weirdo.
I'm happy to be that.
All right. Well, just going to do a quick breakdown of the latest Optech letter because it's that time of week, and then pass it off to Rick for the UASF stuff. So Bitcoin Core 0.16.2 has been released. So just really like the two real big things there are the bug that Sergio Lerner pointed out in Merkle proofs was fixed in the verify transaction out proof RPC. So that should not be an issue at this point anymore. And then like we covered with the last newsletter breakdown, abandoned transaction will now abandon all like grandchildren transaction and descendant transactions instead of just the immediate child transactions. So if you have ever had to use that or find yourself in that situation, it's a good thing to remember. Fees were doing good, but they have been spiking up today. Probably, I'm going to assume, based on the amount of 1 Satoshi per byte somebody doing consolidations, although I haven't really looked too deep into the size and the input-output consistency of those transactions. But pretty much, newsletter is just kind of a breakdown from a developer at Zappo on kind of their progress consolidating UTXOs over the past few months. And mostly just looking at like a cost analysis of like how things would have gone cost-wise if they had not bothered doing this. And pretty much the example he gave was a 2 of 3 multi-sig spend at around 100 Satoshis per byte would cost around 360,000 Satoshis with a number of scattered outputs. And by consolidating those, perhaps around 2 Satoshis per byte, and then spending a single output at the 100 Satoshis a byte level, you're able to bring the cost for both of those down to around 41,000. So, I mean, that's like 87% savings. So, I mean, it's really just kind of a breakdown of why it makes sense to do this. And it's not something you should ignore if you are regularly receiving payments. And then there's the talk that Peter Woolley gave in San Francisco. Videos up, mostly kind of looking at Schnorr and just in general improvements to the Bitcoin scripting language and kind of where he's going to be devoting most of his resources for the time being, just mostly Schnorr and Taproot to kind of get a little bit of efficiency in terms of multi-path scripts. And then obviously with Schnorr, the privacy that would be involved in that, especially with things like atomic swaps, so that in the best case, you're not really distinguishing that spend actually being involved with an atomic swap. And something I found interesting, they grabbed a few Q&A questions from Stack Exchange with Bitcoin, and kind of Schnorr versus ECDSA, an issue somebody ran into with HD key derivation, kind of the size of Darren-coded signatures, and then kind of why there's still standardness requirements for pay-to-script hash transactions, and why there is kind of a relay limitation on the peer-to-peer network to only relay standard transactions. But, you know, like we kind of said when they first started putting this out, we're just going to do a really quick, rough breakdown, and I highly suggest that everybody really try to keep up with themselves. It's really just a nice, succinct kind of breakdown of like the most important issues really going on with protocol development and software development. So that's it for today. I guess, Rick, want to dive us into the fun times?
Yeah, man, let's celebrate the independence of developers being able to work, you know, without having to worry whether or not SegWit will be implemented or not. And yeah, we got this tweet from Shaolin Fry today. Happy UASF Day. It's been, like I was saying earlier, I've been thinking about this for the past 24 hours because, yeah, we've been kind of wrapped up in this ever since it really got started. And I kind of had to type up some notes here, just sort of, you know, my perspective and the way that we've sort of moved through this thing. And because, you know, we've been seeing some tweets from the Bcash side. They certainly see it as an Independence Day for themselves, too. So let's see. Yeah, I wrote down here, UASF, it's a great thing to celebrate and might be the best example to show the system's checks and balances, incentive structures, and actors working within that system to maintain Nakamoto consensus. You know, that's one of the, like when I do my introduction to Bitcoin, I bring up this UASF and BIP 148 and BIP 91 and the way that the politics all sort of, you know, springs into action, this incentive structure and the checks and balances. A lot of people can't see that till you start bringing up these arguments. So, yeah, when you look at Bitcoin, it's a system that keeps people's incentives aligned to work together at maintaining a decentralized secure network. So, you know, if you're new to the scene, you should read up to the history of the scaling debate. You could see how the actors with different vested interests behave during this period. And not necessarily to remember bad actors, but just to observe incentive alignments falling into place. For a while there, after the Hong Kong agreement, it was dubious why miners wouldn't signal SegWit, or some would and then change their minds, and tweets that suggested one and, you know, then turned out another. And it was because certain mechanics of the incentive structure weren't known to all, and it disturbed the security of the network and really kind of activated the users there. If you really kind of got a bigger picture of what was going on, because for a little while there, everyone was worried about mining centralization, which I get. It's a lot of manufacturing in China, and the government's intentions and interest in the project weren't exactly that clear. But, you know, it was pretty distributed. They were selling retail. There was the hash rate seemed distributed. It wasn't too much of a worry on my end. The value proposition of Bitcoin sort of said that more miners were going to be coming into the space. But, however, this wasn't something. Okay, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I lost my spot. Yeah, however, this wasn't something that really made me fear for the network. It was just part of Bitcoin's history. Like I was saying, the ASIC development, that first mover advantage is real, and it takes a while for others to see the value proposition and sort of come on board. And so I knew that that ecosystem would keep moving outward as time moved on, unless there was some unknown incentives at work that might keep the system from updating into a tenable way to actually scale Bitcoin, like covert ASIC boost and ant bleed. That was, you know, I could understand the covert ASIC boost, hiding that, you know, efficiency for as long as possible to try and profit as much as possible for as long as possible. I could understand the incentive from a miner's perspective to do that. But then the ant bleed on top of that, with the distribution from China there. That's one of those things where it's like you start adding it up, the ASIC boost plus the ant bleed, all coming from a particular location where the intentions aren't exactly that clear. That's sort of activated, most of the users there to where, I mean, for a minute there, I was kind of sweating about it, just like, okay, that's a lot of control of the network. This is something really to worry about. So, sorry about this.
We demand perfection.
It's like, this is like really part of our story too. And I've like got notes, but it's almost like I could just go from the heart on this thing, but it's like, it really is a historic thing. And there's an article there in the show notes that really goes through the history point by point. But, like I was saying, these things, I'm sorry. These things allowed, go ahead, Adam. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just, I don't know if it's the same article, but you're bringing to mind something that I saw. Chris Belcher has like a really long article. It's more like a list of links, and it goes through this whole history you're describing. So we might want to add that to the show notes as well. But please continue.
Yes, certainly. It's something that everybody's trying to document and to make sure that we don't forget it, because like we're saying, people have their own perspectives on this and the way that it all shook out. And, I think it's important that we just sort of see it, try to explain it to the new people that are coming on board to where they understand how this sort of showed Bitcoin's checks and balance system and the way that people's incentives align in order to work together to maintain the network. That's something that's really hard to come up with a pinpoint example of that. So after all this, the miners coming together, the miners coming from China and ASIC boost and ant bleed, it was like a real question of how would we get SegWit activated, with a lot of miners being in control there, and whose intention, to not they're not upgrading at best is their intention, because they want to keep their efficiencies and everything, and at worst, they could hurt the network, with their possibility of rolling back the chain or double spending, that sort of thing. With the China intentions, it's all a real big problem. So enter Shaolin Fry and BIP 148 and the movement of UASF and the idea to stop confirming blocks on the network if the miner is not signaling SegWit. And that flag day was set for today a year ago. And that really pushed miners into a position where they had to decide as far as, is the incentive structure that way that we're maintaining it, is it enough for us to keep going like this, or should we actually sort of keep going with the mission statement of Bitcoin as far as trying to scale it in a way that is efficient for everyone, that's not it's not going to centralize problems and sort of lead back to the errors of the day. So it brought the miners back to the discussion, and this brought a lot of contention amongst the groups, and the movement really pointed out another piece of information after the fact. The fact is that when users come together to show their intention for a step forward in the network, it cannot be ignored. That's something where, we've seen after the fact information, like with the ETH fork, it was and the DAO hack. It's all after the fact. We could sort of point to it and say, the DAO hack, we pretty much knew that was a bailout, but afterwards, it's really been a great example to point to. And this is the same thing. It's just like an after the fact. It's like you can point to it. And, the mechanics of Bitcoin was mostly in software and hardware space, where software with hardware created a system that's ideal for money and value transfer. But it wasn't until UASF that the real meat space and social networks within Bitcoin showed its robust ability to resist change when necessary and move forward when consensus is reached. This story and the optics from it really helped lead Bitcoin to where it is today, with price and future development interest on the Lightning Network, and people doing things like CoinJoin and bulletproofs, and able to work with the idea of what is ahead of you in the future. And it's a huge part of Bitcoin's history, and that's where I wrote these notes, but it is something that I'm like a little emotional about, just because like it is something that I'm proud to be a part of. It's like I was in the battlefields in Afghanistan. I was at the front range, the front line of the Superdome during Katrina, and there's like a sort of nostalgic respect for being there at that moment in time. Whenever you were called to duty, and are you going to do what is your duty as far as the way you see that the system is playing out and the way that things are moving with the information in front of you. And I really hold the similar nostalgic respect for UASF and all the guys involved in the way that we were able to sort of prove that this system can continue to grow in a way that we can still maintain without sort of centralized, like everything kind of leads towards centralization. So it's always a fight to keep this decentralized. And, this is like one of those, just like I'm saying, it's a great movement to pinpoint out. And if you're trying to show people what's interesting about Bitcoin other than just digital scarcity, it's this sort of argument you could bring up to sort of show the politics in Bitcoin and the way that, things play out in the network. So just a real quick shout out to some of the, like, really one of the major ground zeros of coordination, the Bitcoin Mumble. All you guys over there, we were all in whale pool and everybody wanted to talk price, and we wanted to talk about how to configure our nodes the right way. And it really took us like going to a different room in order to actually start coordinating the way to get people to get their nodes, in the right format, to where they would be signaling BIP 148 and sort of show their intention that they would really like SegWit. It was a great place to, to be there and sort of educate. And it was like a constant daily thing where we were figuring out what's the next front on this. I'm really proud to be a part of the digest, man. That's like we're just sort of continuing on, because that was we sort of came out of that as far as the after SegWit activation, the sort of like suing 2x narrative was going to come out, and that was where just user signaling and all that. It's like we need to push back on some of the misinformation coming out there. So happy 1 year anniversary, everybody. UASF, all you guys on the digest crew, Shinobi and Janine, aka all you guys from the Mumble. Really appreciate it. It's been awesome, and we're continuing the fight, man. Let's keep moving forward.
Yeah, and I do want to point out that we'll be having our own anniversary just for Block Digest in about 2 weeks, because the first episode that Block Digest ever did was on August 15th. So in 2 weeks, we'll be having our own anniversary, because now we're on episode, I believe, 118. So we won't be falling on any significant number, I don't think, for the anniversary. But yeah, it's amazing to think that we've been, or I think I joined several episodes in, but you guys have been doing this for a year now, so that's pretty cool.
We've all been here pretty much from the beginning, Janine. Like, it's just a few days difference. But with the UASF though, it's like one specific thing I want to kind of bring up that I've only really mentioned a few times, but like as far as like the origin of it, like there are just all kinds of like crazy conspiracy theories. Like, some people on the Bcash side point at like Blockstream as if this was some kind of nefarious plot organized by Blockstream or the core developers, and make these insane claims that all of the developers who were against this were just faking it so that they could claim they had nothing to do with it. And like this entire idea literally came out of just a conversation between me, Chris Belker, Alp, and Shaolin Fry. And the idea was pretty much Chris Belker's. Like, he just brought up like the entire dynamic of soft fork activation and like why it is done the way it is with BIP9, where you have miners signaling just pretty much as a coordination mechanism so that everybody else can see like miners are enforcing it. Now it's safe to start using this as the rest of the economic nodes in the network upgrade until you've gotten to that complete point where all of the economic nodes are now enforcing it. And then from that point on, it doesn't matter whether miners do or not, because any invalid blocks will be rejected by the rest of the economy. And I mean, it's like, it's one of those weird chicken and egg problems where really the only reason that miners were involved in any kind of signaling for activation was just because it's a clearly visible point of coordination to get everybody to kind of shift over to enforcing the rules so that it's safe to use. And he just kind of started thinking, you know, we don't even need miners to really like upgrade and mine these transactions themselves. Like they can just put a border node that enforces things in between their actual mining node and the network, and that's good enough. It'll safeguard like their mining operation from ever even being relayed a SegWit invalid block. Like they don't have to directly upgrade their systems right away. They don't even have to like actually mine SegWit transactions, because people who want to use it will just relay it across the network and eventually be mined by miners who do. And he kind of just like slowly came to the realization that like we don't need to get everybody to just do this right now. Like we can kind of be like, hey, like who the hell are you to tell us what we can do with our coins? Like you're free to not involve yourself with mining this, with participating in this yourself, but we want to. And that was literally the entire like rationale behind the UASF and like what became BIP 148. You know, like I specifically highlighted in the BIP while Rick was talking, the best case scenario from that very first conversation was just that they would just activate it. There would be no split. There would be no need to have this market warfare where the price of BIP 148 coins were bidded up to the point where it like attracted miners out of sheer economic incentive. Like the best case is they just activated. And that's exactly what happened. Like, you know, people like continue to point at the New York agreement or 2X as if that was the reason SegWit was activated. But all of those things were literally created sheerly out of a response to the user activated soft fork. Like those things would not have happened if BIP 148 had not been put out there and people hadn't started running it. Like the UASF was what triggered all of that. And at the end of the day, it did exactly what we hoped the best case scenario was. They just activated it because they did not want to deal with people who actually would follow through with a split, who actually would dump their coins on the other chain and assert their sovereignty over this kind of drum circle hippie, everybody has to get along attitude. Like this was something that we wanted, and one way or another, like split or no split, it was going to happen. And things worked out the best case we had hoped. They just activated it, and now we can move on and keep building things.
Yeah, man, it's a great thing that we have SegWit, and you know, I mean, that's what I was saying as far as like just the developers for a long time there were just worried about like, is SegWit something I should I be working with, knowing that SegWit is going to be implemented, and it's just like a big headache there as far as the scaling debate and how long that dragged out and really held up development because people were worried about that. So it's good to know that those guys can work without having that fear anymore. So yeah, it is one of those things where yeah.
Kind of chopping out a little bit, Rick. Maybe it might have to kill your video. Uh-oh. I think we lost Rick, guys.
Shall I weigh in with a few thoughts about this? Or
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe not. Maybe I should just go ahead. Yeah. I think my focus, my experience of the scaling debate was like really early on, way before UASF, like I guess 2015. People started arguing about it more and more, and I really tried to keep out of it because I just felt like it was fundamentally like a technical debate about, you know, what's a reasonable block size, really. That's what it kind of started out as. But I think what really turned me around was SegWit, because when SegWit came along, and it was just such an obvious win. It's not just like it improved the network, but it actually fixed a bug in it. And I think that's a very critical point in this, that we celebrate the success of the coordination of users, and I think that's quite right. But I think it only happened because of the nature of the thing that we were changing, we were upgrading, was actually a very, very deep and fundamental bug fix in what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin simply had a bug in it. I mean, most people won't remember this, but back in the day, I think it was in 2015, Bram Cohen gave a talk. I think it might have been the San Francisco Bitcoin Devs Meetup. And this talk was kind of hilarious because it was a long rant about how utterly shit Bitcoin is because it has malleability. And so the fact that it was this very fundamental bug fix was really critical. And when I started to see the other side of the debate, by which I mean people who were advocating for larger blocks and tried to argue that essentially SegWit was a bunch of rubbish and it was broken, and it was just suddenly became like the scales fell from my eyes, and I realized the people on the other side of the debate, for whatever reason, I'm not going to try and impute their reasoning, were just talking utter rubbish. And because they were talking utter rubbish, and because it was a very fundamental and necessary bug fix, that meant that overall, I just had to fall into the bit 148 camp when it came along. I mean, it took me a little while. I had to read, Shalom Fry's email, beautifully constructed argument that he made. And although I was looking at it and thinking, bloody hell, are we actually going to be able to coordinate people on this? I thought, just screw it, because if we can't make this happen, then the whole project is a complete and utter failure. And so I just jumped fully on board with the bit 148 thing, even though I do take the argument that people had, Maxwell and many other people had the argument this is brinksmanship and it's not really how we should be operating. I just felt like if people, including the miners, are going to block this, then we're just pissing in the wind. We're just wasting our time. So I think probably a lot of people thought like me. A lot of people who think seriously about Bitcoin just thought, well, look, this is a very severe measure to take, but we're forced into it. There's no option. And luckily, the game theory was all there and it all worked. So great.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry, Rick, if you want to finish what you were saying when you lagged up. Oh,
yeah, man. I was just talking about, I was going to say, the response from UASF and those guys with their, these hidden incentives. And, they had to fork off to do that project and continue on with that direction. But, yeah, definitely agree with Adam there, where it's like, if we couldn't pull this off, then what are we doing here in Bitcoin? Like, this is something where we all need to sort of show that we work together and we come to this Nakamoto consensus forward. It was certainly something where it was a test. It was a test for Bitcoin, and I feel like we got over that hump. And a lot of the real development's going to happen in the near future. And like we were saying earlier, there, people can still argue about what's the best way to scale Bitcoin, but I think the market and the developers and the users have all sort of aligned as far as the tenable way to do that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's without SegWit, it's like, what can we do? Like, you can't build any kind of dependent layer on top of that when you know that what you're trying to peg it to is just shifting sands in terms of your ability to actually reference it and know that reference will stay valid. And I mean, I really feel like, I think ASIC boost was definitely a big part of it, at least in Jihan and Bitmain's incentives and motives for kind of delaying things. But as far as the wider community that eventually forked off into Bcash, I really do think that it was just they saw that if we did this, then everything else in terms of layering out and really just streamlining to be as efficient as possible, nothing could stop it at that point. And they were just trying to strong arm us into having no option but follow their course and just try to kind of scale things through brute force. And I mean, it's inevitable that is just a failure. Before compact blocks and relay efficiencies were actually integrated into the protocol, like you're looking at mining centralization risks. And like, thankfully we've dealt with that now for the most part, but like cranking up block sizes prior to that would have just skewed things to benefit Geon even more. Like when you really get into the dynamics of how users interact with the network and how like you fundamentally need access to the data structure that is the blockchain to really interact with your balance, to be aware of your balance. And like the cost of running a node, the more you increase that block size, they explode exponentially. And ultimately, like you're pretty much looking at even accessing that information as an end user becoming a scarce economic resource. You're looking at all kinds of screwy incentive changes, like when the blockchain is dozens of terabytes in size, where do you go get a copy when you want to bootstrap and be your own node in the network? Does that become a scarce economic resource that can be used to gate people out of the system? Like it's unavoidable that every interaction an end user or even somebody who wanted to be a new like participant on the actual network itself would become a good that people could charge for, could just like price gouge and use that as a way to kind of like corral the network and build a wall around it. And I mean, it's like that's the path that we would have had to look forward to if the UASF hadn't succeeded. And like personally, if Bitcoin was even able to keep market demand in that situation, like, and actually succeed in being adopted, to me, that's a nightmare. Like that is literally like what a dystopian dictator would want something like Bitcoin to evolve into. And it's like this would not be what it could still be in the future if this had all not succeeded.
Yeah.
It's I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, the interesting thing for me is that the amount of misinformation about SegWit has not died down at all, even after, a year now. Like, I think it was the other day, I watched like the first 2 or 3 minutes of Rick Falkfinge's video about SegWit adoption being bullshit. And within the first minute, he's saying like BTC chain and BCH chain, two separate forks. They've both forked. And it's like, no. And the hilarious thing is that these people, like, they say that, running a node doesn't matter. But if any of them, like, that kind of shows that they don't run a node either, because if they did, they would know that you can use any old version of the Bitcoin Core software and it will work with the current Bitcoin network. You can't do that with Bitcoin Cash. Like, it just won't. And that's how you can tell that one is a fork and the other one isn't. But of course they don't want, that's why they don't want people to run nodes, because can you imagine if some of these Bcachers actually ran nodes and then they tried to run old Bitcoin software with Bitcoin Cash? It wouldn't work, and they'd be like, oh well, now I see why running a node is important, because then I would know even if there's actually a fork happening. Like they've been convinced that there's been 2 forks and not one. Like, they don't understand how any of this works. And so I think that this whole notion that all this effort they're putting in to convince people not to run nodes, I think is part of that. Like, they want it to appear like, oh, we just went our 2 separate ways and that was it. But the reality is that no, they left Bitcoin because they didn't want to have SegWit for whatever reason. But SegWit is a soft fork. It's backwards compatible. That was the whole point. You can use it or you don't have to use it, like either way. But I think it's just still interesting to me how much misinformation there still is. And it all comes down to the central premise of they're trying to convince people not to run nodes and effectively not be full users participating in the consensus of the network.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely something where we need to keep, like, we needed a celebration day. I remember back in February, end of February, or maybe it was April, like we were talking about, man, this time last year we were getting UASF all in line. So I'm glad we came up with a day to celebrate, bring it up and talk about it, because yeah, the misinformation is still out there. There's people still saying SegWit coins and, saying that they were celebrating their independence. And it's definitely one of those things where, it's a good thing to point back to and say, this is why there's Bitcoin. You have individuals confirming their transactions, validating these transactions, and claiming their sovereign financial freedom in this system. And if you have like a guy telling you that validation doesn't mean shit and that nodes don't mean anything, it's at least it'll kind of point people in the direction of like, okay, did you want another sort of centralized system like a digital, or do you want to do this new thing that's revolutionary? Because that all involves these mechanics, the thing that's still moving forward after 9 years. And yeah, we can at least keep pointing to this until this narrative as far as Bcash is Bitcoin kind of dies down. I think Jameson Lopp had a great
Starting to kind of cut out again, Rick.
tweet.
Uh-oh. Yeah, that internet at Rick's new place is not good.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, just to kind of continue what Rick was saying, like, I think there's a parallel between the fact that, they discount the value of, validating information that you receive for yourself and not trusting other people, which is exactly what they want everyone they're talking to do. They don't want them to actually run the software, verify what they're saying, because if they did, if any of the Bcashers did that, it would, be obvious that they're spitting out false information.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know, it's just, let's kind of start off like giving like all of our last thoughts on this, I guess, to move along into Adam's Adam and gang's nice idea. Like the UASF was like really like the turning point for me when I think I really like gained a serious confidence that this could work in the long term. Because I mean, I've been pretty public about this, but when XT was first proposed, like I was an XT supporter. And it wasn't until like I started asking Gavin Andreessen questions about like the technicals of things, and he literally just outright lied to me. And I started digging into things that I really kind of started getting a grasp for how this really all worked, and just the real like interplay of all the different like layers of scaling things. And like from that moment on until the UASF succeeded, I was honestly terrified of Bitcoin turning in the direction like where I just described. Like, imagine if we had been forced into just raising the block size and trying to scale through brute force. Because, like, I mean, there are some pretty stupid people in the world who really just do not take any effort to familiarize themselves or learn about like ways of thinking or concepts that they don't already understand. And it was just terrifying to me to think about Bitcoin going that other direction and still maintaining market support, like still attracting liquidity and continuing to appreciate in value. Because like that honestly, in my mind, would have been a path down to a literal instantiation of the kinds of like Rothschild conspiracy theories that get thrown around everywhere, a chip in your hand, like a system where everybody's activity everywhere is completely centrally tracked and tagged and controlled. And you can just be trivially locked out if the few people running that system decide they're going to shut you out of it. And like I was honestly terrified of Bitcoin moving in that direction until this succeeded. Because like until the UASF actually proved that people can assert their sovereignty, can really fight to maintain a path towards decentralization, like that was like I really felt like it was almost inevitable to really slide down that path. And like BIP 148 succeeding, like that was the moment where I realized, okay, like we can actually do this. Like we can avoid sliding into that hole.
Yeah, sorry about the crappy internet. I was just gonna say that, yeah, it's something that I'm glad we came up with a day to celebrate it, and hopefully we could just keep bringing it up every year and keep remembering the story to just educate those that are coming in, because it is one of those things where, like we were saying a minute ago, just how it's hard to show examples of all this system and the way that it works. So UASF is a great one to point out.
Well, I guess Janine and Adam, you guys have any last thoughts on this?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
Janine, shoot.
Well, I was just thinking about, because we keep calling this Independence Day, which is a very interesting name because automatically people think of the American independence, which was, it was a battle of, getting independence from something. But I think this is more of an instance of getting independence to do something, which is to validate information for yourself and not have to trust anyone. So I'm all about is that a negative rights thing? Do we need Blake to come in here?
Oh, man.
I think that we'll wind up going 2 hours over if he tries to hop in. Alrighty then, I guess move along to this pay to endpoint proposal that Nopara posted about yesterday. He kind of described it as reinventing pay to IP, except in a secure way. So
yeah, I'm going to claim that one. Actually, that was my joke. I suddenly realized a couple of days afterwards. I said to the rest of them, I said, "Have we just reinvented pay to IP?" And everyone just laughed because obviously pay to IP was basically the worst idea in the history of Bitcoin.
So I guess,
but anyway,
you want to just kind of take us through it?
Oh, you want me to take you through it? Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, how to summarize simply. So basically, this is a bunch of people who got together, no names, no pack drill, as we say. In other words, some of the people wanted to remain anonymous, so then just to keep it simple, just keep it anonymous. It's not the Bilderberg group, all right? It's not like some Dragon, Bilderberg, whatever, okay? It's just some people who are very passionate about Bitcoin privacy, and some of them are also passionate about their own privacy. So that's why you're not getting any names apart from, me and Nopara so far. So that's that. Now, so I wanted to sort of mention the group in the sense that it was a long discussion and it was a whole bunch of different ideas. And the reason it was a whole bunch of different ideas is because people have different things that they want to achieve. We can use the word CoinJoin, and so to sort of set the stage, the concept of CoinJoin should be thought of in the most abstract sense possible. In other words, that whenever you do a transaction where more than one person is providing inputs, that's CoinJoin. You can argue about the exact definition, but that's what I'm talking about. And if you think about it, there's more than one thing that might be useful for. First of all, there's the idea, as we know it today, of CoinJoin as a way of gaining privacy by sort of screwing around with what blockchain tracing or blockchain analysis does. But there's also, if you think about it, more recently been a lot of discussion about how we can improve the scalability of Bitcoin, especially using Schnorr signatures, because using Schnorr signatures, we can aggregate signatures together so that, I mean, as more technical listeners will know or viewers will know, probably the largest part of a Bitcoin transaction in terms of the space it occupies is the signatures, well, along with the pub keys, but mainly, let's say, the signatures. So if we use Schnorr, we can do something called signature aggregation, which allows us to take multiple signatures and sort of combine them into one. Now, unfortunately, that is actually an interactive process. But if you think about it, if we're going to get together and like merge our transactions together for privacy, well, we might also want to merge them together for aggregation and thus for scalability wins. And this is a particularly appealing idea to some people, I think. And the reason it's especially appealing is because if you could think about it, when you set up special wallets and special tech to do CoinJoin to get privacy, there's a slight problem where ordinary people have this feeling of, I'm not sure I want to get involved in that, because if I'm getting involved in that, then most of the people who are getting involved with that are doing shady things. They're criminals or they're sort of slightly dodgy. So I don't really want to be one of the people in that group, right? Now, I'm not saying everyone thinks like that, but some people do. And so it creates a kind of a friction there. And also the fact that if it's interactive, you've got this problem of, it's a whole lot of hassle. I've got to do all this, press all these buttons. And so if we can create an economic incentive for people to aggregate transactions together, and that's what Schnorr signature aggregation does, then suddenly you're winning on both fronts, because you could, in theory, have a process whereby people get together in some mechanism and start merging their transactions in order to gain space wins, which means it reduces their transaction costs. But at the same time, they might also be getting better privacy on their coin. So that's really cool. So that was an idea that was part of the mix in these discussions. The other ideas that were involved in the discussions were things like, well, we've got multiple different ways of doing CoinJoin. There's been several years now. It's been like 5 years since it was proposed. And there's been probably, you could say, 3 or 4 actual like real world implementations. Some of them used like servers to aggregate users to, well, I suppose all of them technically have used servers in some way or other. Some of them, like Join Market, well, Join Market specifically used a market mechanism. Some of them use like, oh, well, here's our wallet, and so everyone who uses our wallet can do the coin join. And more recently, we've got No Power with his Wasabi wallet, which, by the way, I'm waiting to do my coin join now. I'm in the mix. You know, so you've got another idea that, like, how can we make it more private at the server by using Xiaomi and blinding? Can we use Coin Shuffle? And we discussed all the different models, okay? And so we were left with a situation of thinking, like, how can we make it as peer-to-peer as possible, so we get as many people as possible involved, reduce the trust as much as possible? How can we maybe fold in signature aggregation? Yeah. How can we, what kind of different coin join models can we use? Can we use models where it's obvious that it's a coin join, but it still gains fungibility? Or can we use models where it isn't obvious that it's a coin join, and so it sort of somewhat gains from the anonymity set of all the other transactions on the network? Or what about if we just use models where we're primarily focused on... Okay, am I giving you the correct impression here? This is a big, wide-ranging discussion, right?
Yeah, I'm following along. I think most of the viewers can.
Right. So you get the idea. There's a lot of different things in the mix there. And it took a lot of like hashing out to think about, okay, we've got stuff that's in play today. You know, we've got Join Market model, we've got Xiaomi model. Well, what can we add? What can we fold? And so there were 2 broad kind of, how to say it? There were 2 broad conclusions. Only the second of which you saw in No Power's article. I think he didn't discuss the first one, but I want to mention the first one, even though we didn't end up being very enthusiastic about it. The idea was this. So imagine that at the moment on the peer-to-peer network, if you want to broadcast a transaction, you send out a TX message. How about we make a modified TX message, which what it does is it sends out the transaction as normal into the mempool, but it also appends something like an endpoint. And by endpoint, we mean usually an onion URL, something like a Tor onion address, hidden service address, because we don't want to give out an IP address, but somewhere where people can see that and they can connect to it. So we would send out the transaction onto the into the mempool. It would have RBF. This is critical. It would have replaced by fee attached to it. So when people coordinate onto this, let's say, hidden service, what they're doing is they're seeing, I see that RBF transaction in the mempool, and it's got that thing attached. So I know that person wants to do coin join. So other people can see that. They can come to that hidden service, and that person who put out that RBF TX into the mempool is going to act as a coordinator. And the exact coordination mechanism is left open, but people would come along and they would maybe deliver an unbroadcast transaction of their own as a kind of commitment. And then once everyone's transactions are all there on that hidden service, the coordinator can recreate a single coin join transaction consisting of all the other people's payments. And in this coordination mechanism, we could also include signature aggregation when that is available, but it's not today. Now, we discussed this model, and it has some pluses and minuses, but maybe one thing about it that I forgot what I was going to say. What is the negative here is, well, one thing is the fact that because you're putting RBF transactions into the mempool, it's kind of spammy. Like if people are attackers, they might be putting lots of these out there. So you've got to defend it. The thing about coin join proposals, you've got to kind of defend against spam on both sides. Oh yeah, and the other main real negative about that is it doesn't really give much privacy. And I want to emphasize this point so that you can understand the second proposal, which is the one that No Power focused on in his article. The main negative with that kind of way of doing things is that if you just simply merge people's individual transactions, think about it this way, like Alice and Bob are going to merge their transactions. Alice has got 2 inputs, Bob has got 2 inputs. Alice has got 1 output and a change, Bob has got 1 output and a change. If you just merge those together, the problem is that the individual payments, so the individual groupings of inputs and outputs, are still very obviously distinct on the blockchain. The reason is because the sum of Alice's 2 inputs is equal to her output plus her change, and the sum of Bob's 2 inputs is equal to the Bob's output plus his change. It's a very obvious, we call that subset sum. You just take the numbers and you can see clearly that they can be divided into 2 subsets. So the fact that they've been combined into one transaction in a coin join might be great for like aggregation, but doesn't really do anything for privacy. So it made us a bit like, you know, like lukewarm, at best lukewarm about that proposal. It might be interesting in future, but at the moment it's not very interesting. And so to sort of move into the second proposal, this is something, I mean, you probably remember that CoinJoin XT talk I gave in Lisbon. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this. I was thinking like, yeah, you can do all kinds of clever transactions and they're all linked together. But if you don't break subset sum in the form that I just described, you're kind of not really achieving very much. And so one thing that breaks subset sum, if you think about it, is just a payment itself. Like, suppose I'm going to pay Rick, okay? I'm just going to pay Rick 1 Bitcoin and the change is like 0. Yeah, right. And the change is 0.5 because I got 1.5 to start with, right? So that's great. But if you said, well, what about subset sum? It doesn't apply, does it? There's no such thing as subset sum because there are no subsets, right? There's just my coins paying to his coins and some of it goes back to me. There's no subset sum there. So at that point, we thought about, well, what if there's a sender, if the receiver of the payment is involved with the coin join? Now, I'd thought about this before, but I'd kind of dismissed it, and I was wrong to dismiss it. I was thinking like, yeah, but then the sender and the receiver have to coordinate, and that is the big drawback. But if you put that drawback to one side for a minute, it's kind of cool because, okay, I'm going to send to a merchant. Let's say, we'll say it's a merchant for now. I'm going to send 1 coin to pay for whatever I'm paying for. Now he's going to give me, let's say, just for example, 2 coins. So let's say I've got my input of 1.5, he's got his input of 2, and I'm paying him 1. So what actually goes out to him is 3, and what goes back to me is the 0.5. Now, depending on the exact numbers, what you find is that you've got that example is bad because you want it to be that it isn't clear which of the 2 is the payment. Like there's a payment and there's a change on the output, right? Let me get straight. Yeah. There's a payment and the change because the merchant doesn't receive a change. If you think about it, he doesn't have to, because inside my payment to him, I can put however much he's owed, right? So you only get 2 outputs in that model. You get the output, which is the payment to the merchant, and the change to me. And if you look at the numbers, you spend some time filling this on paper, you'll realize that in most situations, it isn't obvious which one is the payment and which one is the change. And not only that, it isn't obvious at all that it's a coin join, right? Because actually most of the time, most payments in the real world do look something like that. They have 2 outputs and they have 1 or 2 or 3 inputs, usually 1 or 2. But we can have that situation here. So we can create something that looks very similar or very much blends into the anonymity set of normal transactions on the network, but is in fact a coin join. And because it's a coin join, it breaks that assumption that all the wallet clustering analysis out there uses, which is it assumes that all the inputs are owned by the same party. So it has that fundamental property of coin join. It doesn't look, in quotes, suspicious, all right? We did look at examples like with different SIG hash flags, but that's going to look watermarked, so we don't really want to do that. Okay, so it's cool in one way. How do we set it up? Just the same way as I suggested in the first version, which is we set it up with, well, it's slightly different. Instead of, obviously, you're not putting stuff on the peer-to-peer network here. What we're doing is the merchant, let's say it's a merchant, will produce a Bitcoin URI. I think it's BIP 21. So we're not talking about BIP 70, right? But we're talking about just basically making the Bitcoin URI scheme include, optionally, or exactly how it works depends. It may include an onion address, let's say. We call it endpoint because it's generic. It doesn't have to be an onion. It could actually be an IP. But it's a destination that the sender can go to and negotiate this coin join with the receiver. Now, there are problems. For example, the first most obvious problem is the receiver has to sign. And a lot of like payment workflows at the moment, especially at merchants, will involve cold wallets, not hot wallets. So they won't want to be signing. We've talked about that with like Nicholas Doré is talking about BTC Pay Server. Maybe you can support it. But, that's one like negative you could consider. Okay, hot wallet is necessary at some point. That's unfortunately fundamental with CoinJoin. So there's that. Another negative is, what about privacy, right? Because when I send you a coin, you don't reveal anything about your wallet to me. You don't reveal any of your UTXOs to me at the time I make the payment. Now it's a bit fuzzy because when I make a payment, I can track afterwards the payments going out that payment, right? And in fact, if you go back to one of the very first blockchain analysis paper, Makel-John in 2013, that was actually their fundamental method they used to improve their wallet clustering. They looked at the clusters on the network and they said, who do the clusters belong to? I know, we'll just pay something to Silk Road, and we'll look at like where that payment goes, right? That helped them find the cluster of Silk Road, and they paid something to Mt. Gox, and they found the cluster of Mt. Gox, and so on. So I'm not so sure that the privacy failure of actually the merchant putting his UTXO into your transaction is as bad as all that. But at the very least, we want to prevent people from pinging merchants and saying, let's do this CoinJoin, give me a UTXO. Whoops, no, I'm not going to do it. Then ping you again and get another UTXO. We don't want that. So we described, and Nopara described in his articles, some possible defenses against that. One of them is a kind of a primitive, like cut and choose protocol, which gives quite good defense, but it involves a certain amount of transaction, like network passing. More advanced idea involves bulletproofs or some kind of zero knowledge proof of a hash pre-image having certain properties. That hasn't been worked out. It's a cool idea, but it adds some extra defense. The other positive I didn't mention, this is important as well, is UTXO consolidation. Because the great thing about this model where the merchant includes his own UTXO is that, now I'm forgetting the details here, but effectively it means that he's not creating like extra UTXOs for himself in this process. And actually you could effectively, in a weird kind of way, end up consolidating, because you get like each UTXO you use it kind of increases in size every time you go through this process. So that's a bit involved, but it could be an advantage as well, UTXO consolidation. Okay, my summing up, I know this is a long, very detailed thing. My summing up is, this is a cool idea. I think its applicability is going to be somewhat limited. So it's not like everyone's suddenly going to be doing this tomorrow, okay? So some people could do it peer-to-peer. If we could do it with merchants, that's really cool, but I suspect certainly initially a lot of merchants might not be interested in doing it because of like the cold wallet thing, and maybe they might be worried about the privacy implications. I don't think they should be, but they might be. So overall, I think it's not going to like set the world alight, but I think it is one of a number of really cool models that we should go forward with. I particularly like these models where it's deniable. It's like it just looks like an ordinary transaction, but it's actually a CoinJoin. I want the wallet clustering people to get confused. Okay, I'll stop. That was a long rant.
Well, I mean, that's exactly why we asked John, Adam. Like, you broke that down way better than I could have, just going off Nopara's write-up about it.
But please ask questions, because I'm sure you got it, but you know, not all of your audience are as clued in as you are. So please ask a few questions.
Well, pretty much like the gist of it, at least with the pay to endpoint aspect, is that you're kind of, in involving the receiver in the payment as well as the sender, you're kind of cloaking the CoinJoin from things. And then the big benefit there is not necessarily the privacy to those two individuals. It's the fact that it just completely throws all the assumption of blockchain analytics out the window. Like, they have to now look at every normal transaction, and instead of just assuming it's a normal transaction, they have to wonder, is it a normal transaction or a CoinJoin like this?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, that was also my intention with CoinJoin XT, which is, for some reason we didn't discuss it at all in this this group meeting, but it's the same concept. And I totally agree. It's very powerful. We've got this problem of plausible deniability. I keep arguing with people like on Twitter and Reddit and God knows where else. Look, I tell them, look, there is this intrinsic fungibility in Bitcoin, but they can always come back to me and say, oh, yeah, but nobody's doing that, right? So the problem is you need a few people doing it, right? So I totally agree with what you just said, but we need people doing it. It doesn't have to be 100%, but if it was even 10%, that would be fantastic, even 5%, you know?
Well, I mean, it's definitely like something that just people engaging in like peer-to-peer transfers, like not involving a business, could do. And I mean, like the first thing I thought when you brought up kind of the downside of a hot wallet is we already kind of have people looking at like new hardware wallet designs for Lightning Network with some kind of automated logic as far as signing a transaction without explicit manual approval. And like the more progress is made on those kind of things, like this could potentially also be applied to a type of coin join like this. So
absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, you're absolutely right. But there's a very interesting little tweak on that, because there is a difference between the solution for hardware wallets, like automatically signing when it's just your coins and when it's not. Gregory Sanders wrote a post on the mailing list like last August or September, and he described this as really ingenious, this fiendish attack you could carry out on a hardware wallet if it was the case that it was signing inputs, but it wasn't the owner of all inputs. So there's actually some like work to do to really make sure that hardware wallets can support CoinJoin, but it'd be really cool if they did. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like, you know, it's things in this space, like we can't expect just snap, everything's perfect. You know, I mean, like I'm speaking for myself, at least, like I'm in this for the long haul. If things like that take like a couple years to actually start getting fleshed out before anybody pushes it to market anywhere, like I'm okay with that, as long as like we can see it like being worked on and improved and coming down the line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm also just like really excited for all these developments and these efficiencies with Schnorr signatures and coin joins. And I know that Samurai's working on an implementation with Lightning for Whirlpool, and y'all are doing the Chaumian mixing, and all that stuff is just like it's great developments to see, because I know that a lot of people are worried about, well, not a lot, but there is a worry there about like privacy on the chain and these chain analytics. And that Medium post, I think, was great about how y'all are just basically going against what they're doing, and it gets them immediately really confused and hard to track these transactions. And one of these conversations we had and discussions about privacy brought a tweet my way where somebody was saying that, you know, regarding privacy, it's like a vaccination. If the majority don't have it, it's significantly less effective. Saying that, you know, these people can watch these endpoints and basically say like all the bad activities coming out of here. But it does sound like these new ways to send a transaction are going to be so hard to break through what exactly is going on that it's gonna maybe do what we need to do, and we don't really have to worry that much about putting CT on the base layer and all the sort of problems that come up with that, just as far as political discussions on the lines, as far as also the technical development. So I really appreciate all the work you guys are doing, Adam and Nopara and the rest of the crew, and the Samurai guys, everybody that's working on these different implementations for privacy. Jameson Lopp is doing his thing, and all the rest of these guys. I mean, like this is these are some major developments that I really appreciate, man. This is like I'm so excited where we got, like, you know, SegWit and everything, and we could just see you guys working on this stuff and not having to worry about all that nonsense.
Yeah, I sometimes think people want the silver bullet, and I'd like it too. I'd like it if there was just one thing and we could just concentrate, oh, that's privacy, that's that, done. But it just seems like in practice it's much more organic. It's just this weird combination of stuff just getting developed. Like I could see in a year from now there being like 4 or 5 different CoinJoin implementations, and then there may be some other stuff. I continue to be excited, as I have been for more than a year now, about Polstra's ideas about scriptless scripts. I strongly recommend people to watch his talk in Boston from about a month or 2 back. I particularly like the way he ended the talk. He said, if you're doing blockchain analysis, you're lying to yourselves and others. I think I really wish people would just like pay attention to the fact that this narrative that we've got, the blockchain analysis just does everything. No, I'm sorry, it actually doesn't work that well. All the evidence I've seen, indirect and direct, tells me that, including like people who've had hundreds of Bitcoin stolen from them and they've never been able to find them. And yeah, of course, you know, the people who run in Monero and Zcash will tell you that of course you need it to be perfect. I understand that, but there are trade-offs in everything, whether it be cryptographic hardness assumption trade-offs, whether it be scalability trade-offs, whether it be anonymity set trade-offs. And the real world is messy, unfortunately. So maybe we're going to get a kind of a messy solution, but we're going to get solutions. So I've been using CoinJoin. I've done thousands and thousands of CoinJoins. It's possible. You can do it. All right, and it's going to get easier. It's going to get much easier. Wasabi's just come out. I'm going to see. I'm involved there. I'm running it. I hope it will get a big group of people using it. So people, give Wasabi a try, and there's going to be new stuff as well.
Yeah, I'm excited for the future, man.
Mm-hmm. And Boogers from the audience, real quick, was just asking if you could do like a quick breakdown of the interactive process of things. He kind of got a little lost in that part.
You mean of the pay to endpoint? Let's say. Should we focus on that one? Yeah. Yeah. So the idea would be that you're a receiver and I'm a sender. So what you're going to do, just like any time you want to receive Bitcoins, you have to give me an address, right? So there's a necessary step of interactivity there. So one way that people give addresses out now is usually merchants, is they use a Bitcoin URI, which is like, when it says like Bitcoin : and then it gives maybe the address and some other details, yeah? So that's not necessarily bit 70, that's something else, that's more. This is just bit 21, where you just literally have a URI, you could click it, it would open your Bitcoin client. So what we're saying is, if we add some field to that says, here is a hidden service address, like blah, blah, blah.onion, right? It could be added to that. And then when your Bitcoin wallet receives that Bitcoin URI, it will have an address and it will have that onion. Now, if things go wrong, the first thing you're going to do, I skipped over this, but the first thing you're going to do is you're going to build a transaction to the address as normal. So it's important that we have as a fallback the ability to send a normal transaction in the normal way, right? So your wallet can build that transaction first. Then it's going to go, if it wants to do this private, send a receiver, pay to endpoint, whatever, if it's going to do this, it's going to connect to that onion address. And then you're going to negotiate with the receiver, because the receiver will have started up that hidden service. And they'll probably be ephemeral. So, it'll be one per payment or one per, I don't know exactly. It might depend. But you're going to go to that destination and you're going to negotiate to get the receiver's like input, so to speak. Or I suppose the receiver would be building there. So you'd be giving your like default transaction, which is not a coin join. He'd look at it and he'd build the coin join transaction. And then on that endpoint, on that server, you would both sign it. And then one or either of you will broadcast it. And the only sort of extra step of interactivity is this thing about, well, what if a malicious payer goes to that endpoint, starts the process, sees the receiver's UTXO, and then goes away and snoops your UTXO. And that's where we introduce these ideas like, cut and choose. Well, it's not cool. You don't have to call it cut and choose. It's basically like build various versions of the transaction and then blah, blah, blah. I don't want to go into it.
Kind of just grab like other like UTXOs that aren't yours and have
that's it. For all of them. Yeah, I mentioned cut and choose, but that's not helpful. It's just a way of like making it very probabilistically difficult for a person to actually snoop your UTXOs. But anyway, you could just put that to one side. It's the core architecture is important, right? Isn't it? Is that there's just a way for someone to set up an endpoint that you can negotiate at. Because at the end of the day, the problem with CoinJoin is you've got to all the people involved in it have got to talk to each other. This is very nice because it's only two people. Because like if you delve into how CoinShuffle works or indeed JoinMarket, in fact, there's a whole load of extra steps you've got to go through. If you've got like 10 people and one of them decides to like play rogue, and then you've got 9 people left, and then you've got to figure out, redesign it. There's a whole bunch of stuff. But this is nice. It's just 2 people. It's pretty easy to defend against malicious behavior in that context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's still like promising. I mean, it's as far as confidential transactions, I'm hopeful for it, but at this point, I've just like kind of taken to the assumption that it's not going to happen as far as like the trade-offs that are currently involved, and like just all the different ways I've been seeing people look at coin joins and like how to integrate that in different processes, like especially like your proposal for CoinJoin XT with Lightning. Just like all we really have to do is just muddle things enough that, like, for instance, if you were to have some chain analytics company submit something to a court they would go, no, like this is not definitive. There is a reasonable doubt here, like that this is getting thrown out.
Yeah, that's the tough one, isn't it? But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Lightning, because we did discuss Lightning, of course. It's very important to include that in the mix. And, you know, everyone, I think most people's perspective, like I'm talking about technical people I've talked to whose opinion is definitely worth listening to. Most people's perspective is like, yeah, Lightning's cool for smallish payments. Don't think it's perfect. It does have, it's a very different kind of system to Bitcoin. So it does have some like weaknesses to do with, like, at the moment it has pre-image linkage, but it has, you know, amounts being exposed, roots. You know, it's not perfect, but it's very good compared to just a naive Bitcoin transaction. So for small amounts, that will be great. Trying to use Lightning as a mixer, we actually discussed that. There is some drawbacks with trying to make that work, to do with making sure you have like capacity in the right directions on the in and outbound. So we couldn't really see that way to make that work, but like the CoinJoin XT thing is, just think of it in the abstract at the moment, that it's kind of cool that there are ways in which you can make the privacy effect of Lightning bleed in to the on-chain. So we talked about subset sum earlier. Basically, Lightning breaks subset sum if you dual fund, you know, you don't really know the mix of coins between the two parties on the channel. And then if they make payments, that gets completely obfuscated unless you can snoop it on Lightning itself. And so that if a bunch of transactions are connected via pre-signing, you can effectively create a situation where there is no possibility to know whether any particular subgraph of the entire blockchain graph is actually like a CoinJoin XT style event, in which case none of the payments are actually necessarily payments. And because there's no subset sum, you can't actually like identify the bound. So it's a bit theoretical at the moment, but it's again an example of what Polster was saying. You know, if you're doing blockchain analysis, you're lying to yourself and others. And by the way, we haven't mentioned ECDSA two-party computation, which means that any single pub key on the network could actually be a multi-sig 2 of 2. That's another assumption that people make, is that when they see a single pub key, they think it's only controlled by one party. I mean, heck, it could be a Shamir secret sharing as well. So it's basically all a bunch of lies, if you think about it like that.
Mm-hmm.
But they sell it. It's snake oil. They sell it to the governments. Governments are stupid. They don't understand what they're looking at. And you know, these guys like Elliptic and Chainalysis, they make money hand over fist, I guess, because they get these contracts. And you can guarantee somebody's going to get put in prison for a tracing on the blockchain, which is actually inaccurate at some point. It's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like, that's why things like this are important. I mean, especially like, you know, like I said, this is nice in the fact that it kind of throws all of their assumptions out the window. Like, it's not just creating privacy for you. It's like, it's degrading the validity of any evidence, like peering into anybody else's things. Mm-hmm. But, you know, it's, I guess before we move along into the next one, just a final note. I am mostly excited in terms of privacy for eCash servers, which I am still irritated, like almost nobody is talking about.
Yeah, that is kind of cool, isn't it? Yeah, I hope. There's like, Jonas Nick is working on Schnorr versions of that, and I recently saw a really cool example of it that Cloudflare are actually using as a way for captures. You can get tokens for doing captures, and then you don't have to do it again and again, like if you're on Tor or something. But if you actually look into the underlying crypto in it, it's based on Schnorr. It's based on like discrete log equivalence proofs. It's really cool, and I totally agree with you. This tech has been sitting there bloody, well, depending on how you look at it, like 20 years, 30 years, and people aren't using it. I don't know. I guess you got to ask why. I mean,
mm-hmm. So I think it's mostly just regulatory fears, but I don't know. No part had an interesting theory. Pretty much having like servers issue tickets for specific redeemable use cases that are still transferable, and kind of just like, I've had a lot of talks about this with Nothing Much as well. It just kind of have like businesses themselves kind of just incidentally become like payment processors just in the course of like giving users a more private way to interact specifically with their services.
Yeah. I don't know. I think, it's regulatory, it's trust, it's the whole central point of failure thing, that somehow the energy just doesn't arise. And we've had these systems, but they're just not getting used. So I don't know.
I think there's enough. Yeah, I think there's enough value and incentive to where people are starting, and like you're saying, the regulations are starting to clear up to where people aren't so afraid to develop now. So hopefully we'll start to see that pick up.
Yeah, maybe.
But I guess, thank you so much for the breakdown. I could not have done that justice compared to you. And,
No problem.
like I said, feel
It
free
was a
to
pleasure.
jump in. But like I said, feel free to jump in after the breakdowns with the rest of the topics. But we're going to slide along into some very awesome news.
All right, what is it?
Avalon has just apparently had their specs leaked for a 7-nanometer ASIC.
What?
And the claimed deficiency is 0.06 to 0.07 watts per gigahash, which, if accurate, would make it the most efficient miner this year. It'd be about 30 terahash per unit with 1,720 watts at the wall. And, to all the people, Cobra, screaming about how Bitmain is impossible to defeat and facing no competition. Here we go, yet another competitor, and one that is actually very well off in terms of their market share, despite being a lot smaller than Bitmain's. Avalon has been around for a long time, maintained consistent product quality, and pretty much a consistent position as the second biggest manufacturer in the space. Bitmain's fucked up its last 2 attempts at 10-nanometer chips. And here we have the second runner in the space throwing out specs for a 7-nanometer chip. And, this is not like dropping right now. This is not officially been released or even like a concrete date for the release been established, but it has been confirmed by the head of sales and marketing from Avalon. So, skepticism is always healthy in this space, but I think given this company's past reputation, this is going to be something really awesome to look forward to. And one other kind of tack in this article I thought it's kind of strange and has me wondering what else Avalon has planned, but they're apparently also working on a 2.8 terahash mining smart TV that actually has the ASICs integrated into the TV. So, and the weird thing for me with that is that they've actually recently been invested in by a major hotel operator in China, the Xinjiang International Group. And so that just kind of, one, has me scratching my head at a reappearance of the kind of silly ideas like 21 Inc. was pushing with a miner and everything, but also the fact that they've recently received investments from a hotel company. When nowadays it's the 21st century. Like every hotel, motel in the world, there's a TV in there. And so kind of just speculating off the top of my head, it really has me wondering if this is potentially a big hotel chain in China considering just integrating this product as the TV in the hotel rooms as a way to, kind of bake in a little bit of the electricity costs with the room fees and just, get a little bit of passive income in terms of having these operating in the hotels. But sum up, yet again, another huge example of competition stepping up to pretty much kick Bitmain in the dick. So, Cobra, if you're watching, can we just cut the nonsense, please?
I got the feeling that's a big no on his side. But yeah, definitely great to see this. And the GMO miner is going to do something similar, right? They were going to put a don't know if that was 10 or 7-nanometer chip within the computer systems that they were going to be building, just like a computer tower where you could, I guess, build your computer in there, or if they were just shipped from the company to where they would have a miner chipset in there too. But the miner chip in a TV, yeah, that definitely kind of harks back to 21 Go. But hey, maybe like you're saying, maybe they got some big plan in that works where, like we were saying earlier, value proposition of Bitcoin, like early first mover advantage basics with Bitmain, they definitely had some power for a while, but things are a changing. So take notice.
You know, it's just real. That TV really has me wondering, like, somebody somewhere has to think the electricity draw is worth it. Otherwise, like, you're kind of just repeating the same mistake that 21 did.
The one thing I would like to know, I don't know if this is a stupid question, maybe it's just because they like it because it rhymes, but is there a reason a lot of these miners have 9 in the name? Like there's Antminer S9, this is A9. Like, is there a reason they like the number 9? Is there something special about it?
Is 9 translated in German to something?
No.
I think
9.
it's just synchronicity in the generation numbers, but yeah.
No,
It's just a coinkydink.
9 in German is just 9.
9.
Yeah.
We'll see the Avalon 9 next.
Well, see, the funniest part about my name, Janine, is that if you split it in half, Janine, it it's like yes, no in German. If you rearrange the letters of it.
That's
Anyway.
that's really cool.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons I ended up getting that nickname is because it's weird like that. But yeah, I'm curious why all of these mining companies are choosing to name their products with 9 in the name. I don't know if it's some kind of secret message or something.
If you're or any of you guys develop a next name at the J9.
It's a conspiracy. AXA is trying to signal that they have further infiltrated the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Oh, it's all a conspiracy. But it's good to see this, the mining decentralization continue.
Mm-hmm. Another nice bit of news, though, as far as hardware integration. Sure, everybody saw Charlie tweet about this, but the HTC Exodus made an announcement a while back about kind of native blockchain integration. And I'm assuming a lot of people ran away with that thinking, oh boy, another nonsense blockchain project. But pretty much like what that boils down to is actually kind of building from the hardware level to really give people a secure way to interact with things as far as cryptographic keys and, you know, interacting with a blockchain. And Charlie recently met with the team and confirmed that they're actually going to be natively supporting Lightning Network, both for Bitcoin and Litecoin. But of course, Charlie points out Litecoin first. But
Of course.
So like this is like, I've kind of been waiting for something like this to happen for a while. And I really think like this is going to kind of kick off a trend as far as smartphone manufacturers and how they look at the design of things kind of from the bottom up in terms of hardware. And it's like things like Bitcoin, like it's not going away. Like this is something that people are going to have to interact with. And really, like at the end of the day, like most people are not going to be equipped to take the security measures completely from scratch on a normal device. I mean, this is why we have things like, you know, the hardware wallets being created. It is attempting to bring at least an increased level of security down to a user experience that your average person can deal with. And like from the ground up, like they're pretty much going to be working on hardware specifically set up to be as secure as possible, managing cryptographic keys. Like this device, they're going to be trying to integrate dApps, which I'm assuming involves something with Ethereum, which I'm not too fond of. But I mean, you know, when you're building a product like this, you have to kind of be as inclusive as possible as far as what users might actually use it for. They're going to be building in like localized identity and data management for that, and pretty much just kind of steering completely away from like cloud storage. Like, you know, this looks to me based on the material like this is going to be probably one of the first smartphones released in a long time that's not trying to shuffle you into getting an account with their cloud service and storing all of your data backed up in the cloud. And I mean, just in general, like I think like that is a hugely positive thing. Like it is really kind of disturbing to me the way that devices like this just shuffle people into like, give all your data to us and just trust us. So going to be an awesome thing. And not going to lie, I am kind of contemplating buying one of these when they're released, but being a bit of a cheap ass, we'll see how that goes. But I mean, it's like, this is what it's going to kind of really take to keep growth in this ecosystem going, like actually integrating these things from a bottom up level into the devices people use. Or we're going to have John McAfee vindicated in one of the only 2 other claims he's made besides $1 million by 2020, that there will be some massive hack in this ecosystem that affects millions of people losing money. And I mean, not only is that something I think everybody in general wants to avoid, but I think hardware manufacturers are really going to see the incentive to make money in providing the product that would actually help negate the potential of something.
Well, considering that he's now building a hardware wallet, that prediction might be a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. A bad wallet at that.
Yeah, McAfee's always got his hands in something. Was he the one pushing the BitFi?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's his company.
Yeah, I know that these the phone and the native Lightning app, that's really cool. And yeah, I think we'll start seeing more of that. And like you're saying, the ground up development, that's the way we're gonna hopefully continue to see this stuff going out. But yeah, also just to split these things up among different hardware wallets or different cold storages and everything like that could avoid that big second prediction there. So we're starting to see all these different developments. I think there was even a little bit of pushback from those BitFi guys saying like, well, we're not trying to be a cold storage. It's like, oh, really? Okay. So there's there's varying temperatures of the storage. And if you don't have it all in one place, maybe we could avoid that huge hack.
Shinobi, could you actually go back to the section of that website where it had the features? Because I saw something where it said that it's going to be the Switzerland of protocols. And it was a very interesting description because most people, when they reference Switzerland as this like meme, it's all about neutrality.
Mm-hmm.
But in this one, it says that it's about interoperability, which I've never heard applied. I've never seen Switzerland used as I've never seen that connected together, but it actually makes sense. Like if you have a country that is basically split up into different cantons that have somewhat a lot of independence from each other, that makes sense that they would still be interoperable at the national level, but then still decentralized in a way. But I've never seen Switzerland used as an example of interoperability. So I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, like I say, from a business perspective, okay, I swear to God, I'm not drunk already. I've literally had a third of a glass of the beer I cracked. But from a business perspective, though, it doesn't make sense to kind of play that maximalist card and just build up your hardware to only interact with one thing. Like it's really, you want to lay out a foundation that's general purpose and just kind of let all the other camps decide how they're going to interact with that. And I mean, it bugs the shit out of me on a personal level, but I can't really fault a business for trying to design something to have as wide of a potential customer base as possible. I mean, that they're in it to make money at the end of the day.
Yep.
All right, though. You wanna slide along, Janine?
Yes, we are now getting to that section where I talk about why privacy is so hard, or at least security is hard. This is probably the third or fourth time that we've shared news about SIM swapping, especially against people in the cryptocurrency space. But I really think that this needs to be repeated. This threat needs to be spoken about over and over again before people actually listen, because it is a growing problem. And with the ubiquity of smartphones, basically under the influence of socially engineerable, bribable mobile service employees, it will probably only get worse in the near term unless people really wake up to the fact that this is a problem. And so while I'm usually loath to recommend motherboard articles, their editorial standards are not the greatest. Lorenzo does do a very good job of investigating a particular forum called, I don't know how to pronounce it, but I think it's OG Users. That's just how I'm going to pronounce it, where apparently valuable social media usernames are sold. And at least one user from that forum has been arrested in the last month in Los Angeles on allegations of identity theft, hacking, and grand theft. He was particularly known, according to other forum users that Lorenzo interviewed, for trying to sell stolen social media accounts for Bitcoin, and also to use SIM swapping as a tactic in order to gain access to people's Bitcoin, including allegedly at least one case of a high-profile investor who attended the consensus conference. And according to a court document, which is shown in the article, he was even brazen enough to text the investor's daughter demanding Bitcoin directly. So from his phone. So the investigators who identified the swapper, who they claim is named Joel Ortiz, alleged that based on records they obtained from AT&T when they started investigating him, that he's conducted this attack on approximately 40 people in total that they know of so far. And they're still trying to find, other people who worked with him or knew about what was going on. But he's so far been the first arrest that we know of. And so just for anyone who doesn't know what SIM swapping is, if they haven't seen it in our previous shows where we've talked about it, I'll read the full description that Lorenzo provides, which is SIM swapping consists of tricking a provider like AT&T or T-Mobile into transferring the target's phone number to a SIM card controlled by the criminal. Once they get the phone number, fraudsters can leverage it to reset the victim's passwords and break into their online accounts. Cryptocurrency accounts are common targets. And in some cases, this works even if the online accounts are protected by two-factor authentication. This kind of attack, also known as a port-out scam, is relatively easy to pull off and has become widespread. The one thing I do want to point out, though, about that description that is a bit wrong, even based on Lorenzo's prior investigation, is that you don't even have to trick AT&T or T-Mobile employees into providing or transferring a phone number to a different SIM card. They're, like Lorenzo did in a previous investigation, he mentioned how they're now being bribed in order to do that. So it's not even a case of, they just need to be trained better about these social engineering tactics that hackers might use. It's the case where they're actually being paid off to, compromise the security of their own customers, which is really bad. Like you can't really defend against that unless you're using a provider who really has stringent policies in place that kind of thing can happen. It's not under the control of a single employee who can just ruin your life for $100. And the reason I think that it's so important to reiterate that this is a problem, it's only getting worse, is because I'm still having to explain to individuals and companies that they need to be more careful about the kinds of information they give out as a matter of habit, particularly in this case, phone numbers. At the very least, if you can avoid it, you should be giving out your personal, or you should not be giving out your personal phone number to people you don't know. You should very much have an awareness of who has knowledge of your phone number, because there are a number of flaws in the ways that phones and mobile networks operate, which you are basically powerless to prevent, even if you do know what you're doing to mitigate the risks. If for business reasons you are essentially required to give out your phone number, have a separate phone for that purpose, especially if you are storing a significant amount of cryptocurrency, or if you use your phone as an access point for a wallet or custodial account. You should have that on a separate device that you are not sharing the phone number to, even for personal reasons if you can avoid it. Like, you should have those things be on separate devices. And obviously, this is not a completely foolproof protection because it's basically security through obscurity. Obviously, that's one of the weakest measures of security you can take. But obviously, the people who are most likely to be targeted are those who are not only freely advertising their phone number, like on business cards that they hand out, but also if they're known as being a cryptocurrency person and they're using their phone to store and access cryptocurrency. And so if you're one of those people and maybe you don't want to carry around multiple phones, then you should at least look into using services like Project Fi. If you're not allergic to Google, like I am to some extent, you should be aware it's a Google project. But basically, that's one of the very few ways that you can get mobile access without having a significant risk that that your SIM card can be swapped, because like a lot of things that Google runs these days, it's abandonware in the sense that there's no customer service really to contact. And so if there's no customer service to contact, you can't really social engineer anybody or bribe anyone. You could obviously bribe Google, but Google has a lot of money, as we know lately. So that is much less likely to happen. Obviously, that's not the only attack vector, but SIM swapping seems to be the easiest one to do. So you should try to mitigate that as much as possible. Ideally, you should only be storing, petty amounts of cryptocurrency on your smartphone if you have to use a smartphone to store it. And anything more than that, you should really just be putting it in chili, what I call chili, or cold storage on a hardware wallet. But yeah, SIM swapping is not a problem that's going to go away soon. But people really need to be more aware of it, especially people who are working for cryptocurrency companies that have access to a lot of customer funds. Even if your phone is not an important factor in that, you can still be threatened. And threatening people who work at cryptocurrency companies who have a lot of custodial funds, you have to still consider that too.
Definitely. Like one of the things that I've heard about mitigating that, and I try to take, is just using a phone that only connects to Wi-Fi. That's not using a SIM card at the moment. Like, so what I try to do is just keep my warm or hot wallets on there, and just I've also got some little things where it's like if you disconnect that phone from the wall, it's going to die within a minute, and it's a few passwords on there. It's definitely like some multiple ways you could protect yourself, and SIM cards, lots of Bitcoin on that phone. That's not a smart idea. It's definitely at risk, and it's good to see somebody kind of being held accountable right now, maybe discourage some of that stuff in the future.
And if you're required to use 2FA, you should use something like a physical token, like a YubiKey, or like something like the Google Authenticator app, like something that is not dependent on an external account that should be swapped out from underneath you just through any of the means Janine broke down. And if the service you're using doesn't support any of these things, you should be very sternly asking them why the fuck they don't support something. All right. So we've had a lot of serious discussion, a lot of very serious tone. Who is ready to laugh at something?
Man, let's lighten the load.
So, Ryan X. Charles, the creator of yours.org, who mysteriously deleted almost all of his tweets the other day, I still don't know why, has come up with yet another completely nonsensical, totally useless business idea where, despite like a normal Bcasher reading about the evil of middlemen, has a business idea where he's literally doing nothing but being a middleman. So he's developed this MoneyButton, which is literally just an iframe button with a webhook so that people can pretty much request Bitcoin Cash payments. And what's their business model? Oh, we'll let little guys just use this for free. This little iframe thing with a webhook that anybody who has any idea what they're doing could just, create a copy of in probably 10 minutes. And for the big guys, we'll charge a percentage and just, cut a little bit off of what you're collecting by putting this button on your website. So let's all give a round of applause for the CEO of the first $1 billion Bcash company.
My goodness, MoneyButton. That just that screams amazing development.
Like, it's like this stuff like this. It seriously makes me wonder, like, are you just walking around shit faced all day? Like, do you do all your thinking with a bottle of vodka in one hand and a funnel in the other? Like, in what world is this a business or a business model?
It didn't like BitPay do this in like 2012 or something. What exactly is the idea? It's just like be a way to pay. I mean, what is that? I don't get it.
But see, BitPay at least has the whole back end where they take your Bitcoins and they'll convert them to fiat and send them to your bank again. It's literally
Wait, so this is just nothing. It's just the button. I don't get it.
Yeah, it's literally just a button that creates a payment request and has a webhook to hook into something.
It's a payment request. It's just a payment request. So that's it. There's no like fiat or.
Yep.
Okay. Interesting.
Like it's like this is just embarrassing. I mean.
I guess maybe the point is they're going to try and get some more transactions to make that part not as embarrassing.
It's like it's a button. It's a button in an iframe with a webhook. That's it.
And it's the zero comp safe as well, right?
Oh yeah.
It's amazing development. I mean, a MoneyButton. It's just like, you hear about bulletproofs and confidential transactions and join market, Tumblebit and coin joins and all these amazing things, and MoneyButton. That's great.
And like the only reason that I even found out that this is a real thing is all the sock puppets on Twitter are apparently going around replying to any Lightning Network related tweet and going, "We have MoneyButton."
Well,
that is a funny story.
Well, my response to that is, well, you fools are all using the Lightning Network enabled Reddit. What are you doing on our network? Huh? You're paying to troll us in our coin.
Yeah, it's just like this. I mean, it's like, seriously, I have nothing else to say except just laugh in a very awkward way or call somebody stupid. Like that, I'm spent.
Let's just keep it to a quiet laughter, because I think everybody's like I saw Cobra's tweet saying Happy Independence Day. Let's not fling shit at each other. So we'll just laugh.
Mm-hmm. But to slide along and do something a little more serious, though. So Northern Trust, a huge financial firm, literally like one of the biggest banks in the world, one of the oldest consistently operating banks in the world, who has around $10 trillion of assets under their control, is kind of starting to dip their toe into cryptocurrency and blockchains. And this is kind of, it might seem like an example of just another useless blockchain project, but let me break down why I don't think that's the case. So to get the blockchain stuff out of the way, pretty much in that front, what they're doing is integrating Hyperledger. So the IBM, or mostly IBM project, that's a lot of the big tech companies are kind of collaborating on in terms of private blockchain implementations. And they're pretty much looking at this as a way to shift over all of their settlement transactions onto a blockchain system. But, it's, like I've said before, especially when looking at the NetBank project by SBI, I believe, in Japan, like it is like this is pretty much just a big company moving to a new tech stack. Like this isn't something that's really relevant to Bitcoiners out there, but it could potentially speed things up a little bit from the perspective of going to this from like I'm sending you an email or making a phone call and trying to get something processed through a middleman that has to actually file paperwork and yada, yada, yada. But aside from like attempting to move into kind of using this for settlement on their back end, they've also started advising hedge funds and kind of providing data and analysis for hedge funds directly investing in and gaining exposure to actual cryptocurrencies. And like none of them were named due to some NDAs involved with their relationship with them. But pretty much they're kind of dipping their toes into risk analysis, anti-money laundering compliance, and also kind of like the metrics by which you evaluate the actual real world value of your assets. Just because in these areas, there are kind of a little bit of differences in terms of interacting with things versus the legacy system. And kind of the CEO spiel about this, especially like they're dipping their toes into blockchain, is that they assume that governments around the world are going to start creating their own tokens and their own digital currencies. And obviously, like, I think this is a completely ridiculous idea. And if you've been watching us at all recently, even most of the central banks in the world are starting to kind of think that is an absurd idea. Just looking at the implications this would have as far as interest rates, like how money is actually issued and debt is managed in the economy at large, as well as just the fact that it would pretty much be a government monopoly institution kind of directly competing with commercial entities like banks. And given the dynamic as far as the economy in a lot of Western countries, especially the United States, financial services are one of the biggest sectors in our economy. Like, not only are they pretty much looking at radically undermining how the financial system works right now, but they're also looking at the inevitable consequence of that being them pretty much destroying an entire industry that makes up a huge chunk of our economy. And I mean, it's not really a viable course to take if your entire mandate for existence is kind of stabilizing the economy and preventing, huge catastrophic crashes in it. So obviously the CEO is kind of way off base there as far as looking at things. But when you really step back and put his attitude aside and kind of look at what they're doing as far as integrating the technology in the back end and what they're doing as far as kind of dipping their toes into offering consulting services to hedge funds that are actually directly involving themselves in cryptocurrencies, they're kind of both familiarizing themselves, at least at a broad level, with the kind of the technology aspect of how systems like Bitcoin work. And they're also making themselves very familiar with the market dynamics and how something like a hedge fund is going to interact with this ecosystem if they choose to expose themselves directly to assets like Bitcoin. And so while this isn't something like, the recent headlines with BlackRock and everybody going, BlackRock's going to jump in, or JP Morgan kind of announcing that they're actually creating a cryptocurrency trading desk. Like this is a firm that has $10 trillion of assets under their management. And they're already advising and providing analysis to hedge funds directly holding Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies and gaining a familiarity with like how that works, like how interacting with the technology, like would actually like play out in the real world, and kind of what like game plan and mentality they have to put together as far as dealing with actual like digital assets like Bitcoin. And so I don't think this kind of plays the same way that a headline like BlackRock looking into cryptocurrencies. But I think that there's a lot more substantial meat here in terms of how this could play out in the long term. With like, it's not, this isn't a firm that's just throwing out like buzzwords in a news headline. Like, they're actually kind of cautiously dipping their toes in the ecosystem and doing serious research as to like how they can interact with this, like what services can they provide for this, and how would they actually like tailor their services to customers who want direct exposure to this ecosystem. And so like I would really go so far as to say that this is like really the first serious indication of real wealth in the world actually kind of looking around and going like, what's going on here? Like not somebody like Mike Novogratz or Tom Lee, like they've kind of already gotten in, they have their position and they're trying to defend that, but an actual institution that's looking like, how can we integrate into this if this stuff doesn't just kind of fall to the wayside and implode on itself?
Yeah, it's great to see like institutional people coming in through the system and really observe, like trying to understand the tech and get it right. I mean, just recently we saw the CME futures do their first exchange for physical transaction where they were moving around the underlying and actually trading Bitcoin. So, this $10 trillion investment fund, it's a good thing they're dipping their toes and not just throwing it all at a couple of projects that just have the buzzwords, right? So, yeah, it's different than the normal hedge fund stories. So it's good to see like they're actually, moving in slowly and trying to understand things and not just throw the money around.
I mean, we'll see how things kind of play out, but dive right into the next kind of tangentially related topic. VanEck has directly responded to the SEC's denial of the Winklevi rule change application and kind of broke down like a point-by-point kind of refutation of the SEC's logic for why the proposal was denied. And it kind of boils down to like the methods of valuation, the liquidity available, custody constraints and solutions, arbitrage, and then the potential for market manipulation. And so in the first category, they kind of point out that, basing like something like an ETF and the net asset value on futures markets is not really a strange thing. Like, kind of to reiterate the dissent from the SEC decision, like there are hundreds of other ETFs on the market for other products and commodities that pretty much track the underlying asset value through futures markets. Like futures markets are something that actually allow that liquidity to build up and help in the process of maturing a market. And so they kind of like pointed out a little bit of inconsistency in the SEC stance here. As well, one of the things they pointed at as far as like liquidity in the market was specifically directed at Gemini, because the Gemini proposal effectively wanted to track the net asset value based on the price of the Gemini auction, which they've set up as kind of an alternative to a traditional order book exchange. And, really ever since it's been started, like Gemini has kind of specifically had problems with liquidity and actually attracting, traders to their marketplace. And especially since last year when the proposal was initially denied, they've had a decent drop off in terms of liquidity. And they kind of point out like this is like kind of extrapolating from that to the market overall is a really erroneous kind of conclusion to make, especially like just looking at the CBOE and CME futures itself. Like there is a huge buildup that seems to be consistently moving forward in terms of liquidity. And like this argument is kind of nonsense. As well, VanEck, and again, this part is kind of a little unclear to me because I know VanEck currently has a proposal in partnership with SolidX that would actually deal with physical Bitcoins themselves. And so I think their statements as far as VanEck will not invest in physically settled Bitcoin contracts, I feel like they're specifically talking about futures that settle in Bitcoin directly, because the proposal that's out right now is clearly like actually dealing with Bitcoin itself and not just purely cash settled futures. But they kind of point out like that they're not kind of looking to go that route in terms of how their ETF would operate, and also pointing out that there are like other players in this ecosystem that could kind of handle and address some of the concerns about actual digital asset custody in the space. As well, they kind of move on to arbitrage, and it's like there are literally 100 or more exchanges in the world right now dealing with cryptocurrencies. And to kind of point out like a lack of arbitrage and stability in price, given how much that has improved, even just over the last year, like except for very fringe cases, like such as, you know, some areas in Africa where there's just huge liquidity problems in terms of actually getting Bitcoin there, or countries like Iran dealing with, you know, sanctions from the rest of the world. Like there is a huge amount of liquidity and a huge amount of arbitrage action going on in the space. And for the vast majority of cases, prices in different exchanges are very tightly held in line by these arbitrage trades. And so like that argument is also nonsense. And then when kind of looking at the potential for market manipulation and other risks, like again, back to how many exchanges there really are on this planet, right? Like being able to manipulate a exchange does not necessarily in any way whatsoever equate to being able to manipulate the entire market. Because if you are able to successfully steer the price in a specific direction on a single exchange, unless all of the other exchanges follow in suit, all you're doing is creating a price discrepancy that's going to be closed up through people running arbitrage. Like if you dump the price down in a huge way on one exchange and everywhere else doesn't follow, people are just going to buy up those coins on that exchange at a much cheaper rate and go sell them somewhere else where the price didn't crash that hard. And like very quickly, that's going to bring the price in the manipulated exchange back in line with everything else. And so it's like really just like kind of reiterating a lot of the points brought up in the dissent letter. Like the SEC is really kind of just grasping at straws and coming up with pretty ludicrous lines of reasoning as far as why an SEC, approval of an ETF should not happen. And I mean, given that this kind of blowback with the types of arguments that they're making is now not only just coming from people in this ecosystem, but actually like members of the SEC, like actual legacy financial institutions, I really don't see those arguments being a valid reason to kind of keep denying proposals like this for much longer. I mean, like, frankly, like even people who are not really a part of this space in the sense that people like us are calling bullshit, like this is not going to fly for much longer.
Yeah, I don't know how much longer they could put up this fight of like, really, I feel like it's a lot of the guys there at the SEC are just not knowledgeable about what's going on, and they're still getting educated and shored up on those lines. And, you know, just looking back at the previous headlines from the past year, they really had a lot of large focus on the whole ICO mania of last year. And, I think they just sort of threw that ETF to the wayside at the beginning of last year and then sort of focused in on that whole token economy. And now they're trying to get back to it. And yeah, it's just like Washington's got so many different layers of games going on there where there's definitely lobbying going on and people, who are defending their position, and then people who are not knowledgeable versus people who are and trying to do the right thing. It's going to be a back and forth there. But like you're saying, I mean, the liquidity's building up, the parameters are all there to where you could have solid custody and, do these types of financial instruments and get it right. But the whole SEC is just like all these agencies. It's got a lot of back and forth within the agency. So hopefully there'll be some ETFs they're going through here real soon. Seems like it's always a topic every show.
Yeah, it's something I've definitely felt weirder and weirder about the more we're just covering what I would call a year ago legacy financial system nonsense. But all right, we got 2 stories left. Let's see if we can keep the overrun to a minimum.
And this one is definitely weird.
I did not receive token compensation from Ripple Labs.
Oh man, this is crazy.
So it's like I don't know. My take on this is very politically based.
Say the headline for the audio listeners.
What? You didn't know that Bill Clinton is going to be the keynote speaker at a Ripple conference? How could you not know that?
It's worth remembering it was Ben Bernanke last time. They had Ben Bernanke in the last one, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like this, like, I really can't, like, think of any way to put this except in some way, like, along political lines. But I mean, like, Bill Clinton as a keynote speaker for this, I cannot see in any way except they have just given up in terms of trying to convince or sell this nonsense to libertarians or anyone just even remotely conservative leaning in any way. And they've just decided, fuck it. Like, let's get Bill Clinton's. We'll try to hoodwink all the liberals. Like, it's the only play left.
Do you think Clinton accepted his fee in XRP? What do you think?
Probably not.
I think Bill Clinton's given up a little bit too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Apparently, his fee's like $100,000. Sorry, I muted myself. Yeah, his fee's like $100,000. I read somewhere.
Oh yeah, those Clintons, they get a pretty penny just for talking. And yeah, at least Ben Bernanke was somewhere in economics, right? Like Bill Clinton, like what does he know about economics? And then, like, I mean, let's not even get into the policies and legislation that was passed in his term, and then just all the yeah, it's peak ridiculousness because it is like Ripple's ridiculous in itself, and Bill Clinton, the Clintons themselves are just in a state of ridiculousness too. It's like you take these really two positively charged ions of ridiculousness and put them together. It's like a supernova of a headline.
It's the economy, stupid. But I mean, like, yeah, you know, like you said, Adam, like, you know, last time it was Ben Bernanke, like former Fed Reserve chairman. It's like, they are just shredding by the day any attempt to like sell themselves as a cryptocurrency or really integrate into the overall cryptocurrency space as like a really like censorship resistant currency that would really empower the individual to be sovereign as an individual. Like they have pretty much just devolved over the last year to literally doing nothing but manipulative headlines that imply the use of XRP in some product they're selling that when you look at it has nothing to do with the Ripple token. It's just some completely separate blockchain system for bank settlement. And it's like they're about done, I think. Like they're almost at the point where I don't think they can keep that going anymore. They just have to really go, we printed a bunch of tokens out of thin air to sell to idiots to fund our company, and now we're just going to build bank infrastructure. I
wouldn't write this stuff off so quick, man. I mean, look at the last bubble. This was like one of the most popular thing amongst all the dum-dums who turned up at the end of the last bubble. You know, I was just listening to another podcast earlier today with I think it was the A16Z podcast, and without wishing to be too impolite, I thought the guy was talking utter drivel. It's some Silicon Valley, you know, guy. I don't even remember what it was called, but he was just talking about how tokens are this great new way of funding everything. And this narrative, I don't think it's going away. It's just we're in a bit of a downturn, but these people are not going away. I don't think so. I know it's absolutely stupid and ridiculous. I mean, XRP is ludicrous. The Ripple company is appalling. It's just appalling at every level, ethically, you know, and technologically it's ridiculous. I mean, they lost the beginning of their supposed blockchain. The whole thing's ludicrous. But people just lap this up. I mean, people are idiots. I'm sorry, they just are.
I don't think it's going to last longer. And I mean, I have no qualms with being impolite, so I'll just say it. I think the only reason that Ripple has community support is because Tiffany Hayden is a pretty attractive woman and has giant tits. And without that, they would not have
Hey.
Janine might have something to say about that.
But I mean, you know, there was I think like 3 or 4 months ago, there was a parliament hearing on Ripple. and I forget his name, but there's actually a gentleman who, like, his entire career is pretty much working the tech stacks behind the scenes in the banks. And it was like even the parliament members were kind of just like looking at the Ripple representative like, what is this? Like, is this a security? Like, you want us to believe that we will use this privately issued cryptocurrency, air quotes, as a reserve currency to handle like intercurrency trading when your company printed it out of thin air and has half of the entire supply under your control? I mean,
half?
like,
It's a lot more than half. It's a lot more.
Well, yeah,
than
but
that.
like they can't even convince the clueless politicians that this is a good idea.
Well, you see, this is where I don't know if it's like a combination of just like, yeah, general education about the subject, but also a perspective issue. I mean, like that, we just did that story about some San Francisco exchange coming up with XRP as its base currency. And like I see it in some of the places here where and we get in the discussions in the mumble sometimes where it's like a question of like Keynesian versus Austrian economics and like how should you support a market and everything. I mean, it's a combination of a few different things, but I do think that one of the biggest issues is just the perspective where people see the trusted third party as not really a problem. And like, they don't really see a reason for all the trouble that we're going through.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all like people don't understand the difference between a business and a protocol. And they just, well, what you just said about trusted third parties, exactly spot on. Yeah. People don't get it.
But, I'm gonna take another quote from that parliament hearing. A completely clueless British politician. You know what his comment was? Wait, so let's say Bitcoin is an open product like Android. Like Ripple would be like the closed source walled garden like Apple, correct?
Yeah.
Well, I can see exactly why they want to have Bill Clinton be the keynote because, Ripple has its own problem where they want to pretend like they have no relationship to XRP.
Yeah.
So I can see where they want I can see. So they should like steal a slogan. Also kind of a nitpicky thing, but I noticed that the hashtag for this conference is like swell of Ripple or like swell on Ripple. And it doesn't make any sense because a swell is not the same thing as a ripple. Why are they using that word? It's such a terrible hashtag. Why don't they just call it RippleConf or something?
They're reaching.
Because Tiffany can just bat her eyes and a million clueless idiots will just retweet it.
The perspective thing.
I mean, it's like I am a blunt prick. That's what I'm.
That you are, man. What's going on with this last story, man? The final story of the day. What is it?
All right, so I bet Boogers, if he's even still here, is like finally they're talking about it. So we recently kind of covered the dynamic with EOS's architecture and the virtual RAM aspect of the system, where the entire kind of state transition process and overall state of the network is limited by how much virtual RAM there is on the network, which is completely controlled by the block producers. So the block producers recently agreed to slowly increase the RAM supply at a rate of 1 virtual kilobyte per block. But oopsies, there was a bug that would have instantly increased the RAM by 1.5 gigabytes, in addition to the slow emission increase. And hold on, the only reason it was only 1.5 gigabytes was because of a buffer overflow. And if it had not been for the buffer overflow, the supply would have instantaneously increased to 1.2 terabytes of virtual RAM. Completely overloaded the network in terms of what anybody's node could actually process, and in an instant destroyed the entire market based around like staking for RAM.
Well, I mean, that's fine, Shinobi, because I think, isn't Craig Wright working on something that terabytes are okay?
But I mean, it's like this is just like this is the perfect illustration of the fact that money is not the deciding factor in terms of the quality of your code or the competency of your developers. They raised $4 billion in an ICO. Are now Block One, the company behind this, is actually now doing an IPO in addition to that. Like, that does not magically make your code good quality. That does not magically resolve fundamental flaws in your system architecture. And it's like, you know, either the VCs are going to have to kind of wake up to this, or they're going to lose a shit ton of money.
Yeah, I think they're going to lose a ton of money, man. I mean, I don't know. EOS, I haven't really dug through that much because it is one of those where there's just so much to dig through. And I don't know. I mean, all that money lapped up, it just, I don't know, man. These things, they like to blow them up the biggest right before they fail. And that's just a big risk, man. Immediately jumping your chain up to 1.2 terabytes like that. There's just so many risks involved. Like, it seems that kind of money thrown into it. I guess we're just still in, in a bubble.
Mm-hmm. So I guess wraps it up for the day and moves us on to final thoughts. And I will load Janine's because she was way ahead of me and started sending me them before I asked.
Yeah, this is a very funny thing. This is something I saw yesterday that made me laugh because, so for anyone who doesn't know, in the previous episode, we talked about the Bitfee wallet and how terrible it was. And they got into a conversation with Pavel from Trezor, and he was telling them to go educate yourself and read BIP39 before you post any of this shit. You're using a concept that we at Trezor invented 5 years ago, and then the Bitfee social person responds, I hope it's not too similar because we filed over a dozen patents on our tech, and if you are infringing on it, it could be a problem. And so Pavel says you can stick your dirty software patents where they belong, into your hairy ass. So I thought that was a great response. Some people thought it was undignified, but this is why I love Trezor.
Blunt. Just be blunt. Like, it's like, I really can't wait until like the first series of patent lawsuits rolls off in this space, where somebody tries to sue patent trolling based on something that's existed for years, or in a lot of cases, decades before Bitcoin even existed. Like, that will be a true popcorn moment.
Oh, it's coming, man. You remember that Walmart filing a patent? Oh, man.
All right. And Janine shared a meme? What?
Yeah, this is actually a bit old. It's from April, but I saw it because I think Bitcoin Art Gallery added it to the website. And I just thought it was really funny because I see lots of people that are split on this, that they say that hash rate causes price or price causes hash rate. And then I actually didn't see the fourth one because that panel did not show up. I only saw the third one where it said price and hash rate are bicausal and exhibit reflexive tendencies. And yeah, so I think the last one says hash rate is a linear function of price, assuming no minor margin compression. If hash rate meets a sufficient threshold, tamper resistance is ensured, giving it a binary effect on valuation. So it's like, it's just a really good meme because anyone who thinks it's a very simplistic answer that hash rate causes price or price causes hash rate, it's a lot more complicated than that. So I like this meme.
Yes, there's definitely some things there that factor in for those hash rates and miners and all their reasons for doing that.
Correlation is not sorry. I was going to say correlation is not causation, but correlation is correlated with causation. And causation causes, like that joke, yeah. It's actually, there's a really good XKCD about that one. But
wait, are you telling me Peter Woolley stole that from XC? Really?
Well, actually, the funny thing is, when he made that post, I like responded like I was only able to have half of this thought because I'd had the same thought, but only the first half, and then I'd seen this XKCD comment, which is really brilliant. It says something like, I went to a statistics class and I learned that correlation is not causation. And the other guy says, so did the class help? And he says, well, I'm not sure, maybe. Because the point is the class is improved understanding correlated with going to the class. Anyway, you have to see it. It's good. Yeah, Peter. What was that? Peter Willer says that he says I'm drunk. That was really weird.
That was the bet. Like that was the peak of the look at me, I'm naval meme.
Oh right, yeah,
right.
Yeah, that was funny.
All right, Rick, you got a little announcement for everybody.
Yeah, I just wanted to let everybody know that I was going to be at this distributed consensus conference here in Boulder, Colorado on the 3rd and 4th of just a couple of days now. So I guess 3rd and 4th, like we won't have any interruption with our show there because we're going to be doing it Sunday. That's a fantastic thing. But yeah, I'll try and get some interviews and maybe talk to a few people there that are going to be there and see what their plans are here and what they're trying to do. Because I know some of the discussions there were talking about these different implementations and what they could learn from each other, and not so much just like my thing trumps all things. So it should be interesting discussions. And if you're in the area, you might want to check it out. There's going to be some after parties and stuff like that, and just crypto people in the area in Boulder, Colorado. Like we were saying many a times, there's a lot of engineers here that like to develop on some platforms that aren't too popular with our fan base or anything, but it's still interesting discussions. So I was just going to let everybody know I'll be there if you are in there and you want to check it out.
All right, and I guess Adam, you got any last thoughts or anything you want to say before we round it off?
No, I just want to say if I was yawning, it's not because I'm bored. It's because it's like midnight here. Sorry about that.
I was about to say sorry for keeping you in.
No, it's fine. I've got nothing else to do. It's just I am it is bedtime, so my thoughts are time to go to bed.
Really appreciate you coming on and explaining everything there to us, and just giving your input on the stories and everything.
Not at all. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thanks for letting me on. Yeah.
All right, and as has been my tendency lately, I'm going to end it with a meme. If you're listening on audio, you have to look on YouTube.
That's pretty good.
All righty. Well, I guess hopefully we should be fine on Sunday when Rick figures his situation out. But till next time, toodaloo.
Subscribe, but only if you want to.